Hey everyone! So in our last video we introduced a few things. The D major chords, staccato markings, and chuck strumming. All helpful tools, but it was a lot. So we're going to take some time in this video to keep practicing them and maybe find some new things to add along the way. To review, let's return to our D major chord. Remember that you have to scrunch your fingers together and that this isn't the most comfortable chord at first, but it does get easier. And also remember, do not use your thumb. That's only for hitchhiking, video games, and telling me you like these videos. With that in mind, let's try our D chord again, 8 quarter note strums. Ready? 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Nice work, and you're continuing to get the hang of this. So let's add in our other new technique, chuck strumming. Remember our down-up chuck pattern with our chords? We had it turned into a dotted 8th 16th pattern with a staccato quarter note, read long, short stop. But let's go back to our original rhythm, where we replaced the dotted 8th 16th figure with 2 normal 8th notes. We don't need to read this long, short stop anymore, but if you want, we can reach back to our first grade rhythm reading and say ti-ti-ta. Try this rhythm with me on the D major chord, and remember to keep the chuck strum in staccato for that quarter note, and play it twice through. Ready? 1, 2, 3, and ti-ti-ta, 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 ti-ti-ta. Sounds good so far. Now let's see what other chords we can pair up with this, starting with some of the ones we used already. We're going to start by adding the G chord. D and G have been sounding nice together, so why not? Let's do 2 measures of D and then 2 measures of G with that same pattern. Ready? 1, 2, 3, and. Okay, sounds good like that. So let's repeat it. Ready? 1, 2, 3, and. Alright, everything's sounding good. So let's throw another one of our chords in there. This time, let's put 2 measures of C in front of D and see how that sounds. 1, 2, 3, and. Okay, I like that. How about this? Let's do all 3 chords, C, then G, then D for 2 bars. D is our new chord that we need extra time with, so this works just fine. Give that a try. Ready? 1, 2, 3, and. And since we've been messing around with C and G, let's mess around with some of our minor chords. Instead of C and G, let's do A minor and E minor. 1 measure of each, followed by 2 measures of D. Give that a try. 1, 2, 3, and. That also sounds pretty cool. So, which of these patterns should we use? Well, I don't think we should have to choose. Let's use all of them. We'll start with our D-G pattern, just like we did before. 2 measures of D, 2 measures of G, and then repeat it. Then we'll add the C-D pattern, and then the C-G-D pattern. Looks good? Almost forgot. the thing with the minor chords. We can fit that in here, right after the C-D pattern. This sort of looks like a big hulking monster, but consider this. We've got tons of opportunities to get better at D, tons of opportunities to practice chuck strumming, and we're using a healthy amount of chords. Not to mention that, similar to Over the Rainbow, we've also doubled up on most chords. In fact, we always double up on the D chord, so again, good practice. Try the whole monstrous thing with me, remembering to down, up, chuck for every measure. Ready? 1, 2, 3, and. Good work, everyone. And now you may be wondering, what are we going to attach this to? I mean, we had to dive into the realm of 90s alternative music to find a song for our last chord progression, so how about this one? Well, I've got one for you. And for this, we will need to travel back in time and take another trip to Germany. However, we're not going as far back as the 1600s or even the 1800s this time. No, we're going to settle on the year 1977 and head to the city of Berlin, the modern-day capital of Germany and the most populous city in the European Union. And there we find an English singer-songwriter who just arrived the previous year in search of something different. His name is David Bowie. David Bowie, born 1947 as David Robert Jones in London, England, is considered to be one of the most influential artists of the 20th century. From 1964, when his career started at age 17, until his passing in 2016 at the age of 69, he sold over 100 million albums during his lifetime. Thought of primarily as a pop and rock artist, he also experimented with electronic and world music throughout his career. Bowie also added elements of theater to his albums and live performances, most notably in the form of his alter ego that he developed in 1972, a rock star alien named Ziggy Stardust. In 1976, Bowie moved to Berlin with friend and punk icon Iggy Pop to work on new material and gather ideas and inspiration. Bowie found Berlin to be a fascinating cosmopolitan city, but there were dark political troubles looming over it. To understand this, we need some context. Near the end of the Second World War in 1945, the leaders of the countries that fought against Nazi Germany, known as the Allied Forces, met to discuss what should happen to Germany when the war was over. This was known as the Yalta Conference. Obviously, the Nazis had to go, but people worried about what might take their place. The three main delegates were President Franklin Roosevelt of the United States, Prime Minister Winston Churchill of the United Kingdom, and Joseph Stalin of Russia, then known as the United Soviet Socialist Republic. All agreed free elections were the key to peace, but Stalin insisted that the Soviet Union should be allowed to occupy Eastern Europe for the safety of all the countries there. Still needing Stalin's help to end the war for good, and believing he would still allow democratic elections, Roosevelt and Churchill agreed. Big mistake. The Soviet Union installed communist governments and canceled elections in their area of Europe, known as the Eastern Bloc. This was an issue for Germans, as half of their country had been handed over to the Soviets and renamed East Germany, and East Germany contained the country's capital, Berlin. However, as part of the Allies' agreement, Berlin still had sections under US, UK, and French control. This meant that if people wanted to leave East Germany, they could go to the Western-controlled half of Berlin and from there fly to West Germany. But over time, the Soviets learned how many people were doing this, and they decided to put a stop to it. In 1961, they began to construct a physical barrier to prevent people from entering West Berlin. This grew to an enormous size, spanning the full length of the city's border, and became known as the Berlin Wall. Families and loved ones were cut off from each other, and those caught trying to cross the border could be arrested or shot. Though Bowie had initially gone to Germany because of his interest in the burgeoning music scene, it was impossible to ignore the effects that this wall, and the divisions it caused, had on everyday people. In 1977, Bowie had begun recording new music at Hansa Ton Studio. Located in the Kreuzberg district of West Berlin, it was a little less than 1 mile away from the wall. Bowie would eventually record 3 albums in Berlin, known as the Berlin Trilogy, between 1977 and 1979. But one song, the title track from the middle album, Heroes, stood out. The song had come about as Bowie had watched 2 of his friends embrace near the wall, imagining what it must have been like for families who couldn't do such a thing under threat of armed guards, and how just a simple action like that was heroic in its own way. Though not initially popular, Heroes gradually gained traction with fans and critics and came to be one of Bowie's most acclaimed songs. And in 1987, early into his Glass Spiders tour, Bowie included the song in his performance in front of the Reichstag, Berlin's pre-war Capitol building that was also located near the wall. Before starting the song, he called out, "We send our best wishes to all of our friends who are on the other side of the wall," and this helped to instigate one of the many mass protests calling for its destruction, which finally happened in 1989. And now we're going to play it with our new chord progression. Though it seems like a lot of information, the form of the song is pretty simple. After 8 measures, we're going to come in and play through it 3 times, always repeating that D to G pattern at the end. Sometimes it seems like Bowie comes in singing at different times, but just stay the course and you'll be all right. I'll help. Okay, everyone, ready?
Like dolphins
done, everyone. Practice both the chords and the strumming as much as you need to, and if you're ready, we're moving on. We're going to get some more of our previous chords involved here. Let's see what we have to work with. Let's begin with A minor, since that was the new chord we included last time. And let's try this, walking down our key of C staircase again, beginning with A minor. From there we go to G, then F, then E minor. But we already used E minor in our last few songs, so let's do something different. How about E7 instead? Okay, that should be interesting, but we're going to stop here. We're not including D minor because we plan on using D major later on, and we're going to hold off on C. So here we have the beginnings of a new chord progression. A minor, G, F, E7. Play it with me, 4 strums per chord. Ready? 1, 2, 3, and... A nice, tidy 4-chord progression. Beautiful. Let's mess with it. We're trying to find places for our D major chord, after all, so what should we do? Well, I have an idea. We're going to squeeze it in right here, in between G and F. And I don't want to abandon the nice, simple 4-measure pattern, so to make room for everything, we'll fit D and F into one measure. Wait a minute, no we won't. D is our guest, and so it gets the honor of its own measure. Sorry, F and E7, but you two have to share a room. So now that we've got all that worked out, let's play it twice through quarter note pulse. Ready? 1, 2, 3, and... That sounds pretty cool, but now we'll take it one step further. We're going to bring in our 8th notes like we used before, but we're going to set our chuck-strum pattern aside and just use 8th notes, 2 sets per measure. So here, here, and it looks like we ran out. Sorry, F and E7, you don't get your own measure, you don't get any 8th notes, but here's what you do get, to keep all 4 beats in the measure. For the others, we're also going to put a quarter and a rest at the end. So now we have a pattern that sounds like ti-ti-ti-ti-ta, shh. And what does that sound like with our chords? Take a listen. As you just saw, I play down, up, down, and then stop the sound with my hand. You could try strumming down the whole time, but that's a little exhausting. So I recommend this pattern, though you can do 4 down strums for the last measure. Try it with me. Ready? 1, 2, 3, and ti-ti-ti-ti-ta, shh, ti-ti-ti-ti-ta, shh, ti-ti-ti-ti-ta, shh, ta-ta-ta-ta. I like this progression. I would even call it a riff, remember that term? And I think we can do some cool things with it. But before we go on, it's going to need a single contrasting part. So let's get to that. Time to bring in C. Don't worry, C, we didn't forget about you, but we're also not starting with you. That honor is going to F. We're going to put 2 measures of F here, and then it's C's turn. But it may have 2 measures as well. How does that sound? With the same speed as our riff, it sounds like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Not bad, but let's add more. We're going to bring G into the game and give it 2 measures, and then give F the last 2 measures to make up for squeezing it in with our weird E7 chord. And how does this all sound? 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, It's not bad, but I think a contrasting section should really contrast. And given how our first section feels a little fast, I think it'd be nice if this section felt a little slower. And to do that, we're going to mess with the rhythm. In every measure, we're going to take the last two quarter notes and combine them together into a single half note. How would that sound? Let's just try the first F and C measures. 1, 2, 3, and ta, 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 ta. It's close, but not quite there. So let's do this. We'll give a little more time to our first quarter note by making it a dotted quarter note, and in turn take a little time away from our second quarter note by turning it into an eighth note. This creates a really common rhythm pattern in music. It's best to think of the dotted quarter-eighth combination as one whole rhythm, as opposed to two separate symbols. It's almost like a half note with a quick tail at the end. Listen. 1, 2, and 1, 2, and 1, 2, and 1, 2. Like that. So the rhythm for every measure now sounds like ta, ti, ta, ta, ti, ta. And for strumming, I'd recommend down, up, down. Let's combine our chords with that and try playing. Ready? 1, 2, 3, and ta, ti, ta, 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 ta, ti, ta. Very good, everyone. With these two sections, we've got enough for our next song. We're going to stay in the world of classic rock, but we'll go a little further back in time and return to the United States, all the way back to the city Buddy Guy called home, Chicago. We never really went over Chicago stats in the first set of videos, so here's some interesting information. It's the largest city not only in the state of Illinois, but also in the entire Midwest region, and the third largest city in the United States, right after LA and New York. It's home to the Bears, the Bulls, the Cubs, the White Sox, and the setting of quite a few 80s comedies. It's a hub of blues, rock, and soul music, and it's also home to the Chicago Transit Authority. Wait a minute, you say. What does that have to do with anything? Doesn't that deal with trains and bus lines? Well, yes, it does. But for a brief moment, it was also the name of a band. In 1967, local Chicago musicians Robert Lamb, Terry Kath, Lee Loughnane, James Pankow, Walter Paradiser, and Danny Seraphin got together to form The Big Thing, wanting to create a band not just driven by guitar, but a horn section as well. After a few gigs, Lamb and Kath, who both shared vocal duties, felt they needed a third vocalist who could sing higher, expanding their options for harmonies. Plus, Lamb felt like his bass parts, performed on organ, weren't quite enough. So, in search of a singer and a bass player, they ended up finding both in Peter Cetera, the last to join the group. In 1968, the entire band moved to Los Angeles at their manager's request and signed to Columbia Records. In a tribute to their hometown, they renamed themselves the Chicago Transit Authority and released their first album in 1969. The album attracted considerable attention. First, it was a double album, which was very rare for a group just starting out. It eventually would go platinum by 1970, and it was nominated for a Grammy Award for Best New Artist. Unfortunately, it also attracted the attention of the real Chicago Transit Authority, who decided they didn't want their name used and filed a lawsuit over it. The band promptly changed their name to just Chicago, which nobody seemed to have a problem with. In an interesting side note, 1969 was also the year of a famous festival concert held in upstate New York, Woodstock. Chicago was invited to play, but their manager turned it down, having already committed the band to other things. Instead, he sent another artist he was managing, an up-and-coming Mexican-American guitar player from California, named Carlos Santana. Santana's performance at Woodstock was widely seen as his breakout gig and rocketed him to international fame. In 1970, Chicago put out another double album, this one called just Chicago, though it would be renamed Chicago 2 in subsequent years. This album continued their rise in success, which would go on well into the 80s and included what would become one of their signature songs and a showcase for Cetera's powerful vocals, 25 or 6 to 4. Written by Robert Lamb, the song was Chicago's first top 5 hit and became a fixture of their live sets and future greatest hits albums. Much has been made of the song's deliberately vague title, with people surmising it's everything from a secret code to a message from aliens. But really, it's a simple play on words about staying up late and writing a song. According to Lamb, and reported by The Straight Dope, a question and answer column that ran in the Chicago Tribune until 2018, it's a reference to a time of day, 25 or 26 minutes to 4 in the morning, shortened to 25 or 6 to 4. In other words, between 3:34 and 3:35 a.m., which is also the ideal time for writing college term papers. But luckily, we've already done our homework and don't need to stay up that late to learn how to play this. Sorry. But seriously, we've got the sections we need, so let's put it together. Most of the song uses a riff that starts in A minor, introduction, verses, instrumental breaks, guitar solo, etc. The one exception is the chorus, at which point we switch to the next section. Before we start playing, there will be an 8-measure introduction, and then the whole band jumps in. After the guitar solo, we take a break for 8 measures again. Gives us a little time to rest our hands and get our bearings. The last 5 measures, or what we might call the coda, has some chords we don't know, so feel free to stop playing then. Your job is over. I think we're ready, so let's see if we can keep up with Chicago.
Waiting for the break of day.
Good job, everyone. Practice that song as much as you need, and if you're ready, let's go on. There's one last thing we're going to go over in preparation for the next episode. We've played a number of songs with the D major chord and used it with the other chords we've already learned, some more than others. But just like when we were dealing with the key of C, there's a reason why we pair certain chords up together, and D is no different. Remember, it's all about the relationship between notes and chords and where each one fits in. And like E7, D is outside the key of C major. But also like E7, there are worlds where D can find a home. However, we won't really understand that unless we understand how to work in other keys and what notes, besides the root, go into a chord. So I think we'd better get to that in the next video.